Hello, everyone, and welcome to TrueFire Live. You are indeed in for a treat today. We've got Reverend Robert Jones Sr. in the house. We've just completed, over the course of 2 days, producing what we consider to be perhaps one of the most important projects we've done in the 25 years we've been doing this. Reverend calls it Blues Traditions. And he digs really deep into the traditions of the blues, the pioneers of the blues, the techniques that are still being used today that were innovated, some of them over 100 years ago. Let me tell you a little bit about Reverend Robert Jones. He plays guitar, harmonica, mandolin, banjo, fiddle. He's recorded 6 albums of his own original and traditional songs. He's hosted award-winning radio programs, Blues from the Lowlands and Deep River. He's taught music history courses at Wayne State University. He is indeed an ordained minister and Baptist pastor. And I love this quote by James Frere about Robert. He says, Robert is perhaps the world's most highly educated blues musician, an ordained minister, a longtime DJ, and a living encyclopedia of blues history. The Reverend Robert Jones is comfortable among juke joint, loud talkers, fancy-hatted church ladies, and PhDs alike. You're going to love the next hour, and as much as we've loved the last 2 days working with Robert on this project. Reverend, how are you, man?
Doing real good, Brother Brad.
I timed that almost perfectly, almost got to the turnaround for you. That was a nice twist there. How are you?
I'm doing well. Just glad to be here and really glad to be a part of this wonderful TrueFire family now.
We've had fun over the past couple of days, huh?
We have. We've really had a ball sort of exploring this idea of what the blues is and what the blues does. And not only blues, but all of the traditional styles that come off the blues and are inspired by the blues, and that the blues in turn inspire. So it's been a whirlwind 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, I in your intro talked about how and I really do think this is perhaps one of the most important projects we've ever undertaken. And, we knew, we had high expectations. We talked before, your pedigree is a mile long, but, it wasn't until you get into the groove, and you started sharing the stories and your knowledge and illustrating them, with the music, that everything seemed to gel together. I mean, talk for a moment, if you will, about, which is a thematic across the whole course, how storytelling is also a way to convey and teach history.
Absolutely. Well, you've got history in books, and a lot of times those books concentrate on what the president is doing or what the kings are doing or the big national policies. But at the same time, there are things that are happening among common people. They are the farmer, the soldier, those kind of people. And their stories tell us as much about history as the history books. But those things are rarely written down. That's what happens when your mother tells you about her father or your grandmother tells you about her father. So, one of the things that I've been blessed to do is to be invited to the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And one of the first voices I met there was a woman by the name of Miss Catherine Wyndham. And she lived in Selma, Alabama, and she loved Selma. My association, my thought about Selma, my family had come from Alabama. But my first memories of Selma were violent memories, looking at Walter Cronkite reporting on Dr. King marching through Selma and having dogs and water hoses, And so, but she loved Selma, and so she's telling all of us, 4,000 people in a tent, about what it was like to be a little girl raised in Selma, the early part of the 20th century. But then she ended that story by saying, these are your stories, and if you don't tell them, they get lost. I started thinking about a story that my grandmother told me about her father, called him Papa, but his name was Will Cunningham. And so then I have music, I have verse. I can take that kind of unwieldy story and put it into verses and communicate, something about a man I saw only one time. And I can think about how the world has changed since my great-grandfather walked the earth in Alabama, in Connecticut County. And it became this. Connecticut County, Alabama, 1925. Will Cunningham rode into town to get his week's supplies. Now, Will was a black man who'd fought in World War I, and he'd faced the smoke and powder, but he never chose to run. He had a favorite scripture whenever times got mean. It was 2 Kings chapter 6, round verse 17. It had helped him back in France when he was far from home, saying, Lord, open up our eyes to see we do not stand alone. 'Cause he didn't pick his battles and he never chose his friends. When he got up in the morning, didn't know how the day would end. But there were angels all around him, chariots on the wind. And he who stood with him were more than those who rode with them. Now Will was my great-grandfather, and he never learned to bow. When other black men stepped aside, Will never figured how. He worked for Boss Mac Binion, who was a hard and wealthy man, 'cause everywhere you were standing, you were on Mac Binion's land. Mac Binion was a white man, but all white men weren't the same, and some would curse you and abuse you and call you out your name. Well, that's the kind Will met that morning when he stepped into the store, just a ball of hate and evil, and very little more. But he did not pick his battles, and he never chose his friends. When he got up in the morning, didn't know how the day would end. But there were angels all around him and chariots on the wind. And those who stood with him were more than those who rode with them. When Will Cunningham met evil, he looked evil in the face. Evil says it's the kind of nigger you gotta put back in his place. So he slapped my great-grandfather to teach him by degrees, but Will answered him with a straight right hand that knocked evil to his knees. It was still Connecticut County back in 1925, and you couldn't whoop a white man if you wanted to stay alive. So Will got back on that wagon and he headed out for home. He didn't want Henrietta and the babies to meet that storm alone. But he did not pick his battles and he never chose his friends. When he got up in the morning, didn't know how the day would end. But there were angels all around him and chariots on the wind. And those who stood with him were more than those who rode with them. Well, evil got his mob together and they passed around the cup. And they said, along about midnight, we'll go string that up. And evil had the rifles, and evil had the rope, and Will had a shotgun, but he didn't have much hope. Then Boss Mac Binion showed up with his pistol in his hand. He said, I heard y'all gonna try to lynch my hardest working man. Say, I don't know who you worthless trash think you come to kill, but I'll gladly shoot the man who lays a hand on my man Will. And one by one they dropped their guns and went into the night. Will live to see another day. He'd won a hopeless fight. And the word of God from World War I had saved him once again. 'Cause he did not pick his battles and he never chose his friends. Will died in a nursing home at the age of 91. And standing at that funeral home is the one who wrote this song. And I tell this old man's story just to pass along that even when you're by yourself, you never stand alone. You can't always pick your battles or always choose your friends. When you get up in the morning, don't know how the day will end. There are angels all around us and chariots on the wind. And those who stand with us are more than those who ride with them. Connecticut County, Alabama, 1925. Will Cunningham rode into town to get his week's supplies.
Wow. Powerful, man.
It's the story, but it's the ability to kind of put it in verse and in context, and to sort of try to tell it as succinctly as you can. I think that's part of the power of music. And there are, in that song, it's a folk song, but there are allusions to gospel in there. You go to the relative minor. It's like, so it's like a joy to be able to use music in conjunction with storytelling, or sometimes songs that tell stories, or stories that set up songs. And that's really been a big part of my whole experience with doing music on stage. I didn't have a big repertoire when I started, so I would sometimes tell stories about the personalities of the songs, or how I learned the songs, or why I learned the songs. And when I got a bigger repertoire, people said, keep the stories in, man, we like the stories. So I call myself a storyteller who uses music.
And very effectively, I might add. That was the real, I would say, not even the icing on the cake. That was the cake in this project.
What we're gonna do now?
Listen, the teaching is awesome in this course. You're an extraordinary educator. You're a phenomenal singer and musician, but your ability to, tell the story, to paint the background and give meaning to not just the words, but even the chord choices, the finger picking patterns. That really, I think, drives home the lesson, and teaches us more about, the history of the culture, the history of the music. It's special.
I realized growing up as a kid, my grandmother loved music. She had this big, gigantic Magnavox, console, television, record player thing. And she loved many kinds of music. Can't say I never heard her like playing Wagner or anything, but she liked a lot of music. And it didn't matter to her whether it was sacred or secular. So I grew up listening to the likes of Muddy Waters, but I'd listen to James Brown. I'd hear Reverend James Cleveland, the Soul Stirrers, all of that stuff. And then when I went to college, I had the opportunity to work at a public radio station, and they had this massive library of blues. And I would read these liner notes and realize that there were people studying my music, ergo studying me. And I thought, maybe we should study ourselves. Maybe we should go back and not necessarily be defined by the people who discovered this music, but maybe we should also consider the opinions of the people who created this music. And it kind of did something to me about 35 or 40 years ago, and I'm still on that journey.
Well, we're very thankful you let us come on the bus with you here.
Thank you.
This is the first of many Reverend and the gang here have talked about. We've got a lot of work to do, I think, Let's show off some of the cool things we've got in this first course of yours. You talk about the Piedmont roll pattern, okay? And, in most courses, someone might say, hey, this is called the Piedmont roll pattern. Here's what it is. Great. Why don't you show us and tell us about the Piedmont roll pattern? Give them a taste for what we do in this project.
So maybe about 30 years ago, I ran across a guy by the name of John Cephas, Bowling Green John Cephas, harmonica Phil Wiggins, probably better known as Cephas and Wiggins. And he was teaching like a blues workshop. And I had been, sort of messing around with the guitar for a while and played most things with my thumb. It was kind of... That was kind of like my approach to playing. But here was Cephas playing this wonderfully flowing music. And at one point, he whips out this column of numbers. And he says, this is the Piedmont roll. Well, East Coast blues is often associated, Piedmont blues, the foot of the mountain. And a lot of people from the Reverend Gary Davis School or the Elizabeth Cotton School or various others, use this idea of having an alternating bass, right? But the problem with the alternating bass is you get the bass going, and now you got to play a melody, and it can screw you up. Or you try to get the melody going, and then you try to add the bass. So what Sifa said is, get this roll going, right? Get this idea of like these inside strings, this pattern, right? Then add the first string, and then add the sixth string. So in a sense, you're playing an alternating bass, and you're addressing the top two strings, which is usually where your melody is, right? So if you damp the strings so that you're not playing a chord, you hear this, right? That's what you're dancing to. That's what you're putting your foot to, right? But when you add the chord, now you've got the potential for a melody, right? So I think about someone from Texas, like Blind Lemon Jefferson, who might do something like this. Well, mama, don't you treat your daughter mean. Mama, don't you treat your daughter mean. Well, mama, don't you treat your daughter mean. You're the meanest woman a man most ever seen. So that is Piedmont Roll in Texas. But the thing that's cool about this is get that pattern going, and you can use it for a number of regional styles. Let's say you go to the key of C, and you're playing a Mississippi tune. Still, right? Let's say we take it to North Carolina. Right? So that Piedmont roll helped me so much to give my thumb and my fingers that independence to play melody and an alternating bass at the same time. So now if I'm playing a tune, my right hand is almost on autopilot. I can concentrate on the changes I need to make within the chord melodically to make it work. And it really freed me up. And so John always said, just 3 things you need to know about the Piedmont roll: practice, practice, practice. So
is it really, it's about learning just practicing the roll until muscle memory takes over.
Yeah.
And once you've got that, you head on over to the left hand and start working melody and chords.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And so there are certain tunes, for example, that, that's an allusion to Elizabeth Cotton's Freight Train. If you're holding that chord, you go. Third fret open, third fret open, so third fret open, second string, and through the chord changes to the G7, back to the C, E, F, C, G, C. And it almost plays itself. Certainly when you get the chord changes down pat with your left hand, then you make certain adjustments just to catch the melody within the pentatonic scale. And it's a really kind of wonderful device that allowed me to get into East Coast picking and allowed me to get away from just that thumb. And now, now I have a more educated thumb, I guess.
That's awesome. That's actually the first set of lessons in the course. A great place, I thought, to start the course with. Well, you thought, and I agreed.
Yeah.
So many of us, those of us that certainly love the blues, but all of us guitar players really want to get into the finger style thing, and it's always a challenge to get the independent, thumb and finger thing happening. And the way you explained it and the way you showed it, I know what I'm going to be working on tonight myself. Okay. Usually we save gear kind of run down at the end, but they're already. Tell us about that guitar, please.
Okay. Well, this guitar is kind of pinstriped, right? It's I was playing somewhere in New York, and the lady said, "First time I've ever seen a pinstripe guitar." Well, it's pinstriped for a reason, and the reason is because I'm from Detroit, right? And so I think that's all you need to know is my guitar has pinstripes, and I'm from Detroit. So I wrote this song kind of as a story about my guitar, I guess. This old house was built on Trumbull Street back in 1910 when the whole world worked for Henry Ford. He was the poor man's friend. Detroit money built it, but it outlived the fame of a city that put the world on wheels and gave Motown its name. But when you come from Detroit, you have to know, my friend, that you cannot surrender and you dare not give in. And even when you're broken and you're almost at the end, know that if you save the pieces, you will rise again. Milton Smith lived in this old house for almost 60 years. And it had its share of singing, and it had its share of tears. Through the Coolies and Hernandezes, time would take its toll. 2012, they took her down, 102 years old. But when you come from Detroit, you have to know, my friend, that you cannot surrender, and you cannot give in. And even when you're broken and you're almost at the end, know that if you save the pieces, you will rise again. I'm just a Detroit storyteller, but I travel near and far. And a Detroit storyteller wants to play Detroit guitars. So I met a builder named Zimnicki, a man of awesome skills. Arch tops, flat tops, ukuleles, ain't nothing he can't build. Say, got something I'd like to show you, and I think it's kinda sweet. See, I built this from this old house. It used to stand on Trumbull Street. I used maple from the floorboards, walnut from the shelves, and this top is from a ceiling joist that I cut and cleaned myself. Now I play a Detroit guitar made of 100-year-old wood, and I got to tell you, she sings mighty good. 'Cause when you come from Detroit, you have to know, my friend, you cannot surrender and you dare not give in. But when you're broken and you're almost at the end, know that if you save the pieces, you will sing again. Know that if you save the pieces, you will sing again. So,
Beautiful, man.
It's cool. So, yeah, this guitar, the reason it's pinstriped is because these wide slats are maple from that old house on Trumbull, and the walnut in between is from the shelves, and the top is literally from a Douglas fir ceiling joist. And the man who put it all together is a friend of mine named Gary Zimnicki. And you'll notice inlaid in the 12th fret is 1910. So it's kind of cool when you get a new guitar, but the wood's already 100 years old. It opens it up.
I mean, literally, the wood is from the house.
It's from the house, yeah. And if you're looking at headstock, The headstock, the house is actually a drawing of the house is inlaid in the
Really?
headstock.
Unreal,
A
man.
guy named Gary Zimnicki's a wonderful builder, and aside from that, I love the idea that no matter where I play, I'm playing Detroit. I mean, that's my hometown.
Incredible.
Detroit's just got a vibe to it, and people always ask me, "How's Detroit?" Like, it's a patient on life support. So I just whip out my guitar and tell them, "Yeah, it's fine. No matter where I'm playing Detroit."
That's fantastic. Another thing that we love about how you present content is you are, the quote talked about the world's most highly educated blues musician. We were talking yesterday. Not that one way is right and one way is wrong, because we agreed it's not, but how some folks will say, let me show you something on the skinny strings, where you're able to talk more about, let me show you this pentatonic and why the pentatonic is important. Can you share a little bit of that wisdom about pentatonic notes?
Yeah, I mean,
and scales?
again, I've been blessed as I stumble onto this material that obviously, when you read the Bible, it's the most quoted, most checked, most, authorized book in the world. So if you look at the idea of playing the guitar, there's absolutely nothing I'm going to say that's going to be brand new. But then you run across something that resonates with you as a performer, and you kind of go, aha, I get it. So one of the things is the idea of the pentatonic scale, the minor pentatonic scale. And sometimes I illustrate that by saying, imagine you come to America, you're transformed back in time, and maybe the year is about 1840, and you stand outside this old weather-beaten building, and the windows and doors are flung open to get a breeze through, and you hear this song that's familiar. You hear, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." And that's cool because you're standing outside of the white Methodist church. And they're Methodists because they've been singing this song for 100 years, but they're still checking the hymnals, right? And they're white because the way the song lands, it's like it lands right on the beat. Amazing grace, how sweet. And there's not a lot of gymnastics, not a lot of vibrato going on. Aretha is not in that church. So go 500 feet down the road and you hear music coming out of the barn. Well, the reason we took you to Mississippi in 1840 is because slavery. And Frederick Douglass talks about this invisible church where those enslaved people go off because they're not welcome or they don't feel welcome in that church, but they have service in the barn. And you hear this coming out of the barn, right? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. One of the reasons that song sounds so different in the barn 500 feet down the road is the way you teach it, right? If something is important in Europe, you write it down, you put it in a book, and you try as best you can to codify it and preserve it. You come with that idea of a scale. And you use that scale to talk about chords and you combine the root and the third and the fifth and the seventh or whatever to produce something we call a chord. In the barn, you came over on a ship like the Amistad and you brought a way of hearing music. You brought probably the minor pentatonic scale. So when you come up to the third in that Amazing Grace, you can use the African or you can use the European or you can mix both, right? Amazing Grace. For a guitar player, you want to take advantage of the fact that the strings bend. And so when you learn it too, it's like when it's passed down, it may be passed down in some pretty unusual ways. So the guy who's teaching you how to play guitar might be saying, now, you got your beat going down, and that's your chord, right? Now, here's some of them skinny ones. That's good, that's good. Now keep that bass going now. Keep them fat ones. And so that process is so kind of holistic and very hard to write down. It's like, how much bend do I do?
Right.
So it's one of those things that can really be best communicated mouth to ear or fingers to ear, right? And so we were talking about that idea of how you learn music. Somebody thinks if you can codify it and you talk about precisely what it is in 12 bars and that kind of thing, that's cool. But to really get the feel of the music, you gotta hunt and peck. You gotta like get around and realize that pentatonic scale is all over the neck of the guitar. Or and so you're connecting that way of hearing that music in a way that produces music and allows you to have fun going between what your voice is saying. Let's say if I'm singing, the guitar can help me sing. Baby, please don't go. Or it might decide to sing back, the call and response. I sing, baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't go back to New Orleans. You know I love you so. No, I love you so. And then there's also the idea that in West African culture, the drum was the most important instrument. Still is. Everything we play probably in America, we're playing the drum. The fiddler is playing the drum with his or her bow hand. The guitarist is playing the drum with that thumb. With the piano player is playing the drum with that left hand. So it sort of all goes back to this idea of these two cultures coming together. European and African culture comes together, and especially in the Deep South, produces American music.
Well said, man.
Thank you.
A great explanation. Do that. You did, what was that tune? Jailhouse Blues or play that?
Yeah. Well, get somebody like Lightning Hopkins.
Yeah.
Right? Lightning comes out of Texas, and there is a prison in Texas on the Brazos River called Sugarland. Sugarland is referred to by Leadbelly in one of his tunes. In fact, even Clyde Barrow of Bonnie and Clyde talked about going to Sugarland. And the guy who takes you to Sugarland is a guy named Bud Russell, a bad man. He is the transport guy for over 40 years, taking men and women to various prisons. And so he becomes the stuff of legend, and he pops up in this blues by Lightning Hopkins. It's called Penitentiary Blues. Lightning uses that guitar to wail. I mean, this is not a fun song, right? This is not joyous. So Lightning starts up with something like, big Brazos, here I come. Oh, Lord. Big brazos, here I come. You know I'm doing time in a penitentiary, and it ain't a thing that I have done. Lord, you should have been on the brazos back in 1910. But Russell drove them pretty women like he did them ugly men. I say, whoa, big brazos, here I come. I'm doing time in a penitentiary when it ain't a thing I have done. So, I mean, that's that pentatonic, man, through Texas. And it shows up in almost anywhere there's blues, anywhere there's jazz, anywhere there's gospel. The pentatonic is in there. You know, it's spirituals. It's like, stand by me, Lord, stand by me. Oh, stand by me, Lord, stand by me. Oh, while I'm on this, oh, teacher's journey. Oh, you know I want Jesus, yeah, to stand by me. It's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's all that pentatonic is getting in between and getting the guitar to sort of sing with you.
You've got some shout outs from Atlanta, Colorado, Montreal, Virginia, Michigan, Florida, Los Angeles, Ireland, Mexico City, Texas, Amsterdam, Portugal, Brazil, and Spain, all online right now.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So it always, we talk about, the music's the universal language, Here's other music lovers, blues players in different time zones around the world, congregating here, right? Isn't that amazing?
That is what makes the 21st century like the most exciting century around. And it also makes it scary, though. When you think about some of these artists are online, some of these examples are online. And one of the reasons I love throwing out some of these names is I'm hoping people go back and Google, Lemon Jefferson or Lightning Hopkins and that kind of stuff. But now we have the music everywhere, but we don't have a lot of context.
That's right.
So, one of the things that I really love about TrueFire and being, part of this family is you can provide some context to this music. And, some music is not, let's say, you listen to a piece by someone like Hugh Ledbetter, and it's, you hear like, whoa, Hannah, Hannah, oh Lord, gal, well, oh, Hannah, Hannah, oh Lord, gal. I mean, that's a work song, right?
Right.
So it's got to have that steady beat rhythm, because in that context, that you don't want to make that, oh, Hannah, Hannah, oh Lord, gal. It does violence to the song.
Right.
So if you understand the context that produced the music, then you can be more authentic about presenting it. And you get away from that idea of appropriation, because it's there for everybody to enjoy, but just respect the source and respect the context. And I think people dig it.
Oh, they definitely. I mean, that's what's special about what you've done here is, everything you've shown us, you've given us the context through the story, and then you sing it and play it, and it all comes together. And for those of us that want to learn, I mean, we're learning the history as we go, right? But with that knowledge and understanding, I think you can play the music a little bit better if you understand what it's all about. Right?
Absolutely. I benefited from learning from a lot of people who were there on the spot. One of my mentors, one of my friends is Roy Bookbinder. And Roy talks about being with Reverend Gary Davis, being his lead guy. And that's invaluable to sort of trying to get into Gary Davis's music, because nobody, including me, plays like Gary Davis. But we all have fun trying. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah, so it's great.
So, what I didn't talk about in the intro is also a pretty special part about you. Besides all your awards, you won that Kresge Arts Fellowship just last year?
Yeah.
2018. In recognition for your work in music composition and performance. You've won Keeping the Blues Alive Award. You're the featured storyteller at the National Storytelling Festival. Outstanding Artist Performer, Detroit Music Award. You get a lot of recognition, don't you?
I do, and I appreciate that.
Well, it's well-deserved.
Well,
and
thank
then, by the way, you've got to check out Reverend's site. It's incredible. All this stuff is up there. But you have played and opened for, it's a who's who list. B.B. King, Bonnie Raitt, Taj Mahal, one of my favorite cats there.
He's amazing.
Junior Wells, Albert Collins, Brownie McGee, Sun Seals, Dr. John, Buddy Guy, Charlie Musselwhite, John Lee Hooker, Doc Watson. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you learn something every time you get to hang out with one of those guys?
I sure do.
Yeah.
There was a blues club in Detroit, or Dearborn, which is a suburb of Detroit, run by a guy named Jimmy Lesnow. I ran into him just the other week, and it was called Sully's. And a lot of the nationally known blues acts would end up performing either at Sully's or a place called the Soup Kitchen Saloon. Neither place is around anymore. And the Soup Kitchen Saloon had the distinction not only of being Detroit's premier blues club for a while, but also they had chili that was called Capital Punishment. So, I love that, man. So, but these guys would come through, and fortunately being an acoustic act, which meant guy, stick a couple microphones in front of him and give him a chair. I didn't need a back line. I didn't need an amp or any of that stuff. I was an easy guy to move in and then move out. And after I do my opening set, I'd sit there and get my tutorial, right? Watching some of the greatest people who had ever done it, do it.
Yeah.
And I think that experience was, for me, wonderful. And it was kind of like going to school, going to college, as you meet these different personalities and see not only their storytelling, but their stagecraft. And some of them were really great in connecting to an audience. Some of them were terrible, but it's okay. They were all these icons of American music.
And all important.
Yeah. Definitely.
Let's do a couple of questions. How about that?
Sure.
George, I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name, George. I don't want to mess it up. But he says, do you still get nervous playing on stage, Rev? And how do you get rid of it if you do?
Absolutely. I think if you get, I'm a little nervous now, right? I think if you get to the point where you don't have any nerves, you're doing it wrong. You've become too full of yourself. But what I do is I kind of step into this personality. Robert Jones, everyday Robert Jones, is not necessarily the most confident guy in the world. But also I preach in a church. So that means you've got to step into whatever it is that you're doing. And when you're in the pulpit, you're the preacher. When you're behind this mic, you're the teacher, or you're the musician, or you're the storyteller. And that person is slightly different from the guy who's at home with his, with your wife going, you still haven't taken out that garbage. So you develop this persona, if you will.
Yeah.
You step into it, and it helps you get through it. and then you step back.
But it's okay to be a little nervous, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like if you think that you got it down pat, that's when you're headed for a downfall, I think. You know.
Let's see, from Carrie, another last name I don't want to mess up. Tell us about those finger picks. Do you do anything special with the one on the index finger?
Yeah, I get fairly heavy gauge finger picks. Like this one is a 25, well, 025, and I kind of just bend them until they stay on, until they grip tight enough to stay on, but not so that they're cutting off any circulation or anything like that. And I've heard people talk about boiling picks, and I've never done that stuff. I just get a fairly heavy pick, try to mold it on this finger. So I've been known to, use some stickum or some glue or something like that if it's loose or if it's like really too light to hold on, because sometimes I can be kind of aggressive in the way I play. But that's it. And incidentally, I discovered that when I started to play, when I got away from just the thumb, then I started to discover that people have so many different approaches to how they use finger picks or how they pick the guitar for that matter. So you'll look at some film of John Hurt and he uses 3 fingers. And I think Brownie McGee used 2 fingers. And Reverend Gary Davis used 1 finger. So I never got past, and so does Merle Travis. So I never got past the thumb and the 4-finger.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you I know you do a lot of like upward picking with that. Do you ever pick down with it?
Yeah.
Well?
The thing is, if you pick down with a finger pick, it will tend to grab the string and fly off and hit the lady in the eye in the front row.
You don't want that.
But what I will do is I learned this sort of from the Mississippi Delta blues, is that when you want to go down, what you do is you use these fingers that have no picks on them, use the nail, and so you get this. Gives you a really nice rhythm, very percussive.
Cool.
Yeah.
Another question. Will this course focus on songwriting, storytelling, or mostly how to play blues guitar? I'll answer that. I mean,
Please.
and I think we sort of have answered that. All of the stories is what paints the context for how to play the blues.
Right.
So, I think that's the special ingredient, is you're getting the context behind the lessons for how to play, the chords, the melodies, the tunes that you're teaching.
Right.
So you get all of the above. Would you?
All of the above. Okay. Absolutely. There's the emphasis, of course. I mean, you're at TrueFire, right? So the emphasis is going to be on how to play, but the emphasis is not on how to be John Hurt or how to be Brownie McGee or how to be anybody but you. The idea is to give you tools that enhance your own playing. Maybe you just play for pleasure, that's fine. Maybe you play on stage and there's something that you hear in the blues, something that resonates with you, and you wonder, how do I get that so it can be a piece of my music? That's what I'm going for.
That's right. We talked about that as well. Most of the principles here, you'll teach the Piedmont roll, great. But most of the principles you can apply to whatever style you play. And in the beginning, you talk about how, the blues have been around for a long time, just about every kind of American music, from jazz, Creole, folk, rock. It's rooted to the blues in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So naturally, these blues principles, whatever, if you play pop music, there's some real value here, It
goes across the board. I mean, one of the things that we're going to address in one of those lessons is not the minor pentatonic scale, but the major pentatonic scale, this idea of those 5 notes, right? And those 5 notes are grounded in 3 chords, right? The 1, 4, 5 of the blues. So if you thought about it as just random facts, then it doesn't really speak to the fact that those 5 notes in the 1920s were called boogie woogie piano. Well, hand me down my jumper, won't you iron my overalls? Won't you hand me down my jumper, won't you iron my overalls? I'm about to catch a train, what they call a cannonball. And that was hot stuff in the 20s. But by the time the 1930s rolled around, America's in a Great Depression. And a lot of those boogie woogie piano players are moving into black churches. All of a sudden, black church music starts swinging like boogie woogie. They don't call it church boogie woogie, call it gospel. This little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, Lord, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Same 3 chords, same 5 notes. Move it to 1935, you get like Bill Monroe in Kentucky inventing something called bluegrass. But he gets a guy named Lester Flatt on guitar, and Lester plays the G run. That G run is played with a flat pick. So you end up with songs like, going down the road feeling bad, Lord, I'm going down the road feeling bad. I'm going down the road feeling bad, Lord, Lord, and I ain't gonna be treated this way. Yeehaw! Right? Same 3 chords, same 5 notes. Move to 1948, you get Ray Charles inventing R&B. Runs out of songs one night about 50 years ago, and he says to the band, "That sang back to me what I sang to you." He say, "Okay," and he goes, "Hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, yo, tell me what I said. Tell me what I said. Tell me what I said, Lord, tell me what I said." Same 5 notes, same 3 chords. Move to 1955 and you got a kid on the television on Sunday night going, "Serve 1 for the money, 2 for the show. You to get it ready now, go cat, go, don't you? Fasten my blue suede shoes. You can do anything but say off my blue suede shoes." Same 5 notes, same 3 chords. Then think about this. In the 1950s, people were not listening to each other's music. Well, kids were. The adults were worried about race mixing and miscegenation in the South. And while they were carrying picket signs saying, "We're worried about our kids listening to this race music," the kids were listening to this race music and digging it. So just like you had an Elvis who was bringing that black music to white audiences, you had a Chuck Berry who was going. Down in Louisiana, down in New Orleans, back up in the woods, I'm on the evergreen. Soon an old cabin made of earth and wood, where a little boy named Johnny B. Good. Little boy can never read or write so well, but he can play the guitar and like the ringing of bells. Say go, go Johnny, go, go, go Johnny, go, 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 go Johnny, go, go, go Johnny, go, 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 yeah, Johnny be good. Same notes, same 5 notes, same 3 chords. So it goes to even the 1960s where you might be down in the deep South in Mississippi or something and have a dance and the kids are separated by a rope to keep the white kids and the black kids from dancing together. But when those kids hear those 5 notes coming from Detroit and they hear what those kids do with those 5 notes, those kids tear down the rope themselves and dance together. I got sunshine on a cloudy day. When it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. Well, I guess you say, what can make me feel this way? My girl, my girl, my girl, talking about my girl, my girl. Ooh, right? So a lot of times I will go into a classroom, either myself or me and my partner, and we'll do that thing we call the 5 notes. We're going to address that in our teaching video as well. But it just shows how American popular music is built on the spine of the blues. And if you understand the blues, you understand a lot of different kinds of music, not just black music, but white music, and music you would never think had anything to do with the blues. But of course, Bill Monroe knew the blues because he knew a guy named Arnold Schultz, and his Uncle Pen was a soulful fiddler, and all of that kind of good stuff. So that's part of the journey that we're going to be on in this series.
Absolutely. That was phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
Folks, let's see, a couple of comments. Giving me goosebumps. We are in the presence of greatness. What a great day to be alive. I mean, you're doing wonderful things for the history of music, not just the blues, and for all of us that are, learning to play. And it never ends, does it? The learning to play.
It absolutely never ends. That's the most wonderful part about this is, like, you'll discover somebody, and they've been there all the time, but it, you don't get the call until you're ready. And you'll discover somebody who is such a major part of American music, and you're off, right? You're like, oh my God, I got to learn how to play this, or I got to. What are they doing? It usually starts off for me with, what are they doing? And you take this thing, and if you've got certain basic elements, now you know how to look for things. If you see this old video of this guy and he's playing in the key of E, but his hand is not up here and it's not down here and it's somewhere in the middle, you think, oh, he's playing E. That gets you close, right? And the A and the B. Whereas if they were playing here, it'd be. And so just having those tools of how to learn is, to me, amazing. It really helps you educate yourself. And if you find a piece of music that touches you in a certain way, now you have permission and you have the tools to learn it.
There are a lot of tools available to anybody who wants to learn how to music. A lot more today than there were certainly when I was growing up. Right?
Goodness, man. I remember, the little scratchy tab that guys hand write out.
Yeah.
Is that an 8 or a 3?
Right.
And then you learn it and you realize the guy wrote it wrong. It was totally
go
not
back.
Right.
I'm older than you. We've established that. So I remember back in the day, taking vinyl records and slowing them down with your thumb to try to pick out lines that are out of pitch and warbly. And, look at what we do today, the tab, video sync, and Reverend, answer this question. This is a good question at this point. The question from Thomas Forrest. Question for Reverend Robert. For someone who doesn't know a lot of blues, where would you start? With modern players and work back in time, or start with the earliest recordings?
I would say start with the stuff that resonates for you. I used to have a radio show in Detroit on a public radio, WDT, and there were certain records I would try to point people toward. There was one called Great Bluesmen at Newport, which was a big sample across the spectrum of American blues music. And you'd have people as diverse as Muddy Waters, Son House, Brownie, Sonny and Brownie, You'd have, Big Maybelle. You'd have just this whole conglomeration of Elizabeth Cotton. And then once you heard something that worked for you, then you kind of could take off on that tangent. And one of the things that's great now in the 21st century is if, let's say, you find Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and it's like, oh my God, this is wonderful. This beautiful middle-aged black woman in a dress wearing a Gibson, playing a Gibson SG with blonde hair. I gotta, boom, you start to type in Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Next thing you know, you've got other film clips, you've got references, you've got somebody who compares her to Chuck Berry because Chuck Berry took an influence from her. You've got all the people, you've got Memphis Minnie, you've got all of these great references that you can just get lost in, right? We didn't have that. We didn't have that when I was a kid. So that's my long answer. It's like find the thing, go and sample around, find a nice anthology, and then find the stuff that works for you.
That's such a great answer. Most people would, especially the people really into the blues and the history of the blues, and would say, go back to the beginning, work your way up. But that's a much better answer, isn't it? Something that speaks to you, something that you feel. Start there.
Yeah.
And work your way back or forward, whichever way,
Absolutely, because sometimes you'll get into that, I've got to start at the beginning with the authentic people. And you run across somebody who's going, and you go, I can't, that's the blues. Forget about it. So you got that happened to me with Charlie Patton.
Yeah.
And I'd read these books. Charlie Patton is the world's greatest blues singer. He's wonderful. You got to check out Charlie Patton. And he's like, I'm a pony, and I'm a black man. I said, no, I don't think so. So you have to start get in where you fit in. And now I love Charlie Patton. It's an acquired taste. Though,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
We were talking about Catman from Clarksdale that, was very much like that.
Yeah.
And that's the real deal right there for sure. But, I didn't have the context for it. So I really didn't know how to receive that information,
Yeah.
One chord blues.
Yes.
You do a great segment on that.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
We think of blues according to the World Book Encyclopedia definition of blues as 3 chords or maybe 4 chords, maybe 5, depending on who's doing the playing and how sophisticated they are as a player. But the fact of the matter is, some blues are 1 chord blues. Go back to the origin of this music, and you didn't need chord changes if you're doing a work song. If you're in a field, you just need a rhythm. Right? So some music kind of is still like that. John Lee Hooker is a perfect example of a guy who'll start a boogie. My daddy was a jockey, though, taught me how to ride, But I think in this course, we took a look at Mississippi John Hurt, and he does a song called Spike Driver, which is 1 chord, it's G, and you use that Piedmont roll again. So the reason it works is because there's strings that you skip over, open strings that you don't need. So you'll have this G on the bass, and this G open, and this G on the first string, and this G7 on the first string, and they all come together to give you something like this. Take this hammer, kid, to the captain. Won't you tell him I'm gone? Tell him I'm gone. Tell him I'm gone. It's a long way from here to Colorado. Honey, that's my home. That's my home. That's my home. So take this hammer and carry to the captain. Won't you tell him I'm gone? Tell him I'm gone. Tell him I'm gone. Right? He can go as long as he needs to go to tell that story and unfold those verses about John Henry, which, strangely enough, is like somebody went back and did a song called, did a book called John Henry, Steel Driving Man, talking about his story. You found out John Henry, there was a John Henry, and he was not 6'6". He was about 5'8".
Really?
And he was not this huge, muscle-bound, double-jointed guy. He was a kid who got sentenced to prison because of petty theft. And in those days, railroads would co-opt prisoners to drive the spikes that put the dynamite charge in to blow open the tunnels that allowed us to connect the country, right, through rails. And originally, the workers, the men who would drive these spikes, you know, you'd have to drive them in a certain depth in order for the charge to take over. It was fine. I mean, they could work and their survival rate was fine. But then these guys come up with this new industry and they come up with the steam drill. And the steam drill kicked up so much dust that the dust would get into the men's lungs and they would be dead within a year. Oh. So the story is not really about John Henry like insanely racing a steam drill. It's about these black men working right next to a steam drill that's killing them. And so John Hurt says, take this hammer and carry it to the captain. Tell him I'm gone. Because I don't want to go out like that, right? It's the hammer that killed John Henry. It won't kill me. Wow. So that's like history, man. And it's a lot more credible than some big guy going,
absolutely.
I'm gonna die with my hammer in my hand, Lord.
Right.
But that's cool too. I mean, I love Lead Belly's version with the guy dying with a hammer in his hand too. But
sure, cool. Why not? You know. More shout outs for you, man, from let's see, Nashville, England, Alabama, Oregon, India, Quebec City, New Orleans.
Wow. That's amazing.
All over the world, right?
It's amazing to know that there are people listening to our conversation in India and Quebec.
Isn't that nuts? I don't know what time it is in India, but it's certainly not the middle of the day, I don't think.
Completely not.
Yeah. We always reflect on, some folks are getting up for breakfast. Some folks are tuning in the middle of their night, Yeah. It's just crazy stuff. Okay, let's... I wanted you to cover, can you talk about that slide? You do a thing on slide, the resonator, open tunings, kind of talk about that a bit, would you?
Yeah. So I mentioned that when I was a kid growing up, maybe I didn't mention it, but when I was a kid growing up, like 10 or 11 years old, my grandmother comes home with a record, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. That was my gateway drug. I mean, I just loved the way those guys worked together. And that was that North Carolina kind of Piedmont influenced blues. But when I got to college, I started hitting the hard stuff. I got to like Son House and Booker White and those guys. And the same grandmother who said, this is the music we used to listen to down south, when she was talking about Brownie, started going like, that's what we moved from down south to get away from, when she started listening to Son House, right? But for me, Son House actually lived in Detroit, died in Detroit, and is buried about 2 miles from where I live now, in a cemetery called Mount Hazel Cemetery. And Son played a resonator guitar. And I saw a photograph of him, probably taken by Dick Waterman back in '64 or something. And I thought, this guy looks like he can sing from a photograph. So I started scouring the universe looking for one of these guitars, and as fate would have it, as God would have it, a friend of mine sold me this one over 30 years ago for I think it was $150
for this particular
guitar, right?
Jeez.
And he's like, take 75 now, and I'll pay 75 later. But it's the best 150 I think I ever spent.
I bet.
It's 1934 National Resonator guitar.
Wow.
And it is kind of like the weapon of choice for some Delta blues cats. So I think about Son and that song he does called the Death Letter Blues. It's one of my favorites. But you got to know that the lick that Son does is not Son's lick. It's like we get into this course and we realize that this music is modular, that you'll have a one part in one song, it'll be that. Go to the 4. The 5. 4. Back to the 1. So Son might use that for Death Letter, or Howlin' Wolf might use it for Little Red Rooster. Or Robert Johnson might use it for worked in the morning, feeling round for my shoes. That you know I had them mean old walking blues. I woke up this morning feeling round for my shoes. It's so modular that you could literally take one lick from one song and add it or appropriate to another song or make up your own lick. So when you start to think about that, the music in that way, it belongs to all of those people, but it doesn't really belong to any of them. You know, they don't have exclusivity on it. So think about a song like Son House's Death Letter Blues, and sometimes, again, I'll go into a classroom, we'll go do an assembly, and you'll give them a little taste of Son House's Death Letter Blues, which has got some great images in it. It's like, I got a letter this morning, how you ring it red, said hurry, hurry, gal, your love is dead. Got a letter this morning, oh no, now you ring it red, saying hurry, hurry, cause the gal, your love is dead. You know, I packed up my suitcase, took off down the road. When I got there, she was laying on a cooling board. I packed my suitcase, thought I took off down the road. You know, when I got there, she was laying on a cooling board. And the song can go on for a really long time. It, you know, sometimes you stretch it out 5-10 minutes. But then one day, I'm in a school and we're talking about epic poetry. And I thought, what would happen if you took Son House's Death Letter Blues and sort of reworked it a little bit? Instead of doing each verse twice, you did each verse once. And you sped the song up and you faded the music out. And it becomes this. I got a letter this morning, how do you think it read? Said, hurry, hurry, cause the gal you love is dead. You know I packed up my suitcase, took off down the road. When I got there, she was laying out on the cooling board. I eased up close and I looked down in her face and said, hey, you know I love you, but I just can't take your place. You know it's the same at 10,000 was standing around the funeral ground. I didn't know how much I loved it till they put my baby in the ground. For my arms, I walked away and said, hey, you know I love you, have to see your judgment day. You know I woke up this morning, it was about the break of day, and I was sitting on a pillow where my baby used to lay. Went to church, bowed down, I tried to pray, but the blues come along and they blowed my spirit away. Woke up this morning about the break of day, and I was hanging on a pillow where my baby used to lay. I said, hush, I thought I heard her call my name. She didn't call so loud, but she called so plain. Yeah, boy. Right? So it's like all the little middle school goes, oh man, that's wonderful. Did he know Tupac? It's like, no, man, no. But that's the idea we were talking about, the connectivity of blues. It's like that forms the basis of hip hop. That forms the basis of rock and in some forms of pop and all that kind of stuff. So I love that idea of utilizing the slide to rhythmically and to well, I'm rolling and tumbling, crying the whole night long. So that whole idea of using the slide, it was the synthesizer of its day, right? It's you got between the notes.
Good point.
Yeah. So it's just it's been a ball, just in the last couple days to put together this first course, and I'm just looking forward to digging deeper and deeper into that catalog of the blues.
Yeah, and you've been working on kind of a book and a concept. That's something you've been, and we've explored together how, and you still should do the book for sure. And I hope
Working
that
on
you
it.
do. But
Yeah.
how, kind of the video, the visual experience, and the audio experience is context also, puts context on the context, if you know what I mean, So let's see. We are, oh man, Tommy's going to kill me because we're way over time here.
Uh-oh.
Let's do, someone just said it's 1:42 a.m. Friday in India. Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you, India.
Tell you what, man, this was awesome. I'm sorry. It was my bad. We went over 20 minutes over, but I think
We went
everyone
20
was
minutes.
digging
It flew, man.
We could go on
It
forever,
flew.
couldn't we?
Yeah.
How about just pick any tune you want and play us out, and we'll say goodbye. Say goodbye to all your fans from all over the place, including India on Friday at 1:42 in the morning.
Definitely India Friday at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to the relationship as, with TrueFire. I think I've been here long enough to see it really is a family. And we've got some of the greatest artists around teaching this stuff. And I'm just count myself blessed as being, hanging out with these folks. I like this song by Blind Willie Johnson because it really doesn't. Willie Johnson recorded it as a moan, but this is a moan that's on the Voyager. It's on the golden record, and it's flying across the universe. This is the time we're living in, right? So it's a song called "Dark Was the Night and Cold Was the Ground." Dark was the night and cold the ground on which the Lord would lay drops of sweat like blood ran down in agony he prayed.
Beautiful. Reverend, thank you so much for carving out more time than I said it would take to
Well,
spend
thank you,
with
Brad.
us. You have a ton of fans all around the world. We're so excited to be doing this with you. This is the first of many, and I'm sure everyone will agree and look forward to all the stuff you come up with. Let's document this thing. Let's pay it forward, okay, for generations to come. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in today, whatever time zone or country or continent you happen to be in. The blues is indeed alive, okay?
And will.
Exact, and doing good. Thank you all for your support. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.